And now I'm delighted to introduce our panelists. Senator Amy Klobuchar has served as the senior senator from Minnesota since 2007. She led the Senate Planning Committee for last week's inauguration and had the honor of presenting introductory remarks for President Biden. She also played a key role in certifying the presidential election results on the fateful day of January 6th. Senator Klobuchar is known for her impressive record of achievement and integrity, coupled with a great sense of humor. I'm proud to add that she's a fellow University of Chicago Law School graduate. Senator Mitt Romney has represented Utah in the United States Senate since January 2019, and he previously served as the governor of Massachusetts. Senator Romney's public service follows a successful business career leading Bain Capital. Blending business and public service comes naturally to Senator Romney. His father, George, was the former governor of Michigan, secretary of HUD, and president of the American Motors Corporation. In fact, in 1959, George Romney addressed the club, and so Senator Romney carries on a family tradition by being with us today. Senator Romney brings a deep understanding of business and the economy and a strong moral compass to his work. And finally, I'm excited to introduce David Axelrod, who will moderate our panel today. In Chicago, we are happy to claim David as one of our own, despite his New York roots. David attended the University of Chicago for college, advised Barack Obama on his political races and during his presidency, and is widely respected as one of the world's most insightful political strategists and commentators. Among other things, David is now the director of the nonpartisan University of Chicago Institute of Politics. He raises money to cure epilepsy, a cause near and dear to my heart, and I count him as a wonderful friend. Thank you all for being here. We are really honored to have you discussing such an important topic and for setting a tremendous example of constructive dialogue and debate. So David, I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deb, for your leadership and also for your friendship, which means so much to Susan and me. And it's great to be with two other good friends, Senators Klobuchar and Romney. And it isn't going to be lost on our sophisticated audience here that when Deb recited some of the things that I've done, one of them was a campaign on which Mitt Romney was on the other side. And it says a lot about him that since that time, we've become good friends. And I learned about his largeness of heart and spirit, and I appreciate that. Deb mentioned, Amy, I'm going to start with you, Senator Klobuchar, because we're going to go by the strict Senate seniority rules here. You did speak at the convention. You helped to organize at the inauguration. You helped to organize the inauguration, and you gave a very inspiring speech there that was consistent with President Biden's theme of unity. What gives you hope? Because you were standing at an empty Capitol behind razor wire and 25,000 troops. What gives you hope that unity, greater unity, can be achieved inside the Capitol and in our politics?
The American people do. The fact that thanks to Mitt and several other courageous people, we got through that horrendous night of January 6th. In the end, it was Senator Blunt and Vice President Pence and I who walked in with the remaining ballots to the House chamber. And the very platform where we held the inauguration was where the insurrectionists had come. There were windows only a week before, completely broken out behind us. There was still, the day of the inauguration, spray paint at the bottom of the columns. It was really chilling when you saw it just a week before. But we made the decision, we must go forward. And as I said that day, it was truly a moment where democracy could lift itself up and brush off the dust and go forward as we always do, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And to me, that moment, whether it was Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace, or Amanda Gorman, that incredible poet, or Mitt Romney's words actually on January 6th at night, where after that whole day we'd been under shelter, he said this, he said, the best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That is the burden and the duty of leadership. And last thing I'd say is Joe Biden is someone who understands that duty of leadership. During the inauguration itself, he got out of his chair and went and talked to Mitch McConnell in the middle of his own inauguration. And I think that he means that he wants to get moving on this pandemic. It's a cause that brings us together to get those shots in the arms, to get through this and it on the other side, to get our economy righted. And I think the members of this club in the great city of Chicago, where I got to go to law school, understand that as well. That we have to, there is just no choice right now but to move forward together.
So Senator Romney, let me ask you about that. The question is was that such a jarring event that it causes people to recalibrate, or do we go back to well-worn habits here? And I ask you that in part because a great colleague and friend of yours, Rob Portman, announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election yesterday. And part of what he said was he was leaving because it's harder to find that middle ground in the Senate. In fact, the front runner for that spot on the Republican side may be Jim Jordan, who is one of the more divisive voices in the House of Representatives. So do you share Senator Klobuchar's hope that this horrific event of January 6th is somehow a watershed and things will improve?
I certainly share her hope. I'm not sure I share a prediction that you're going to see a dramatic change in behavior on either side. I think both parties have found that playing to the base is in their electoral best interest. They're primarily concerned, particularly in a state that's a red state or a state that's a blue state, they're more concerned with the primary than they are with the general election. We have a lot of blue states, a lot of red states, so the majority of people in our body are going to be concerned about their primary. They're going to be playing to the base. I don't think you're going to see the people who are some of the contenders for 2024 in my party, Tom Cotton, Nikki Haley, Marco Rubio, Josh Hawley. I don't hear them speaking in tones of moderation, but instead continuing the same rhetoric as in the past. But I do believe that there continues to be a real sentiment of working together to deal with a crisis. And obviously the COVID setting is a crisis. I think we also recognize that the emergence of China as a great power and a threatening power is a real crisis that we have not dealt with effectively yet. I think there's a growing recognition, particularly given how much money we're using to support the COVID crisis through these rescue bills, that we're going to have to ultimately deal with the structural deficits we have. And I think there's a growing sense that climate change is a real problem, even on my side of the aisle. So all those things suggest we'll be able to get work done, but I think the rhetoric is probably not going to change a lot. Hopefully there'll be more respect and comity in public settings, but I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that yet, I'm afraid.
You know, we're blessed to have two candidates for president of the United States here today, one in each party's primaries, and each of you face the pressures that come from being, you both were known as moderates. Senator, Romney, you were the governor of Massachusetts, and that was the style in which you governed and the image that you had. Senator Klobuchar, you unabashedly proclaim yourself that way. What are the challenges of being a moderate running in primaries in which there's polarity, and the most active voices in each party demand something else? And Senator Klobuchar, why don't you start?
Well, I was just remembering the New Hampshire debate. Mitt and I both remember New Hampshire fondly. But I remember that debate because we were asked, would you have a problem with a socialist leading your ticket? And I think I was the only one who spoke up and said yes. And I think that it's a difficult time in everything that Mitt identified, the polarization of the base, the funding, actually. I would also add social media where you just get attacked. Although Mitt did get a viral video for blowing out his birthday cake of candles on Twinkies, so that was a positive for him. But I think that all of that is problematic. But in the end, in our party, someone who's had a very similar, as you know, David, message to me did win. And when he won, he said, I want to end this grim era of demonization. So that gives me some hope. And I also think that's where a lot of the public is right now. Now, that doesn't mean that in a crisis, you don't have to take dramatic steps, because I was willing to talk about the debt and have been parts of groups that have worked on it. But right now, most economists, I think Kevin Hassard even is supporting the Biden plan here, that most of them think we have needed and continue to need to invest.
Yeah, I want to get to that in a second. I just want to, on the last question, I want to ask Senator Romney, and I have to confess here, I have a view on this because having run the campaign opposite you, the scariest thing for us would have been if you could have run as you are, as a moderate Republican. It's not clear to me, and this was true for Senator McCain as well, that you could run that way and be the nominee of your party. And how does anybody balance those really hard demands of, you can't be president unless you're the nominee. And you saw your party moving in the other direction. How did you navigate that?
There's no question, but that I was not the ideal fit with the Republican Party at that time, nor am I the ideal fit today with the Republican Party, even more so today than then. I remember my strategist joking. He said, if you want to become the nominee of our party, and this was in 2012, you're going to have to steal it. And he laughed and he said, you're Mormon, but the party is more and more evangelical. You're a millionaire, and the party is more and more populist. And you're a moderate, and the party is more and more conservative. And so we're just going to have to work a lot harder to become the nominee. And I think I think we're seeing that today. Although, if I'm looking at it 2024, the math can work in your favor even as a moderate. So, I look right now and I see a whole host of people who are, if you will, seeing if they can't follow in the same pathway that Donald Trump became the nominee. If they're taking a more populist approach than perhaps our traditional Republican roots would suggest. But then someone like Chris Christie is staking out different ground. So who knows? Maybe I know it's strange to say that Chris Christie would be seen as the moderate, but maybe that's a possibility. So there's always a path. But I think you have to be cognizant of just how many opponents there are and what it takes to become the one who wins the plurality. Winning the majority would be hard as a moderate, but the plurality, I think, is a good shot even within my party.
Yeah, as President Biden underscored in your own primary process, Senator Klobuchar, and as you point out. So let me just stick with you for a second, Senator Romney. Senator Klobuchar said that social media is a big problem, and I want to underscore that and talk about it a little. 70–80% of Republicans believe that the election was rigged or stolen. It's not just because Donald Trump said so, but also because that was the story that was being told on media outlets that they watched, through social media. And we are increasingly living in this siloed environment where people get news that affirms their points of view, but not necessarily informs their points of view. How do you defeat that? And how do we have one national conversation about one set of facts?
I don't know that I've found the answer to that question, to be honest, and that's something which we're all struggling with, and I know the social media companies are struggling with as well. I can note this, however, which is in addition to social media perpetuating the big lie, if you will, that somehow Donald Trump is still president and Joseph Biden stole the election. You have many of the Trump supporters in elected office, senators, congresspeople, governors, continuing to say the same thing, that the election was stolen. Now, if you had every major Republican elected official say, you know what, the Trump campaign had a chance to take their message to the courts laughed them out of court. I've seen no evidence that suggests that there was widespread voter fraud. If each of us elected Republicans went out and said that, if we went on Fox, and we have a lot of guys that are regularly on Fox, and gals, if they were saying, you know what, I was a big Trump supporter, I was really pulling for Donald Trump, but you know what, he lost fair and square. If that were happening, I think the impact of social media would be less. The challenge is, in my view, you have a lot of people who think it's in their electoral best interest to continue with whatever lie is being spread on social media, thinking that that's going to get them more support long term and short term. I don't know whether it will or it won't, but I think it's a trend which is most unfortunate. It takes, I mean, for the nation to be united, it takes leaders to do things that call for unity and that bring us together. And we haven't seen that yet, not just from President Trump, who I don't think he will ever say I lost fair and square, but every other Republican ought to be saying it.
Yeah. Well, Senator Klobuchar, I always say that there's a reason that profiles encouraged with such a slim volume. Politicians by their nature, and this is not new, this has always been true, tend to do those things that will perpetuate themselves in office. And there is this unhealthy feeding loop where they don't want to contradict these stories that gain popularity with the base, and they don't want to play that role. You've been deeply involved, and you have a book coming out, I believe, on antitrust, just to give you a little plug there. Would you see there being legislative action to hold some of these big platforms on which social media interactions take place responsible for the material that they're disseminating?
Yes, so one of the things I think you'll find amusing, David, having covered the Democratic primary and my back and forth with my friend, and I mean this, my friend Mayor Buttigieg, is that Pete's book is called Trust and my book is called Antitrust. So, but in any case, and we shouldn't confuse two issues, because one is the content misinformation and some of the things that we can look at for that, and that is worthy of looking at. I didn't like some of the proposals were out there. You don't want to limit free speech, those things, but there is that to look at. What I'm looking at is actually, and it's not just with tech companies, it's monopolization in general, and how we've seen so much consolidation and pretty weakened antitrust laws. And there's a middle ground there. You don't want to punish success, as I look over at Mitt on the other side of the screen and his success. You don't want to punish success. But when you go back to the founding of our country and Adam Smith warning about the power of overgrown armies of monopolies, and you go through, it was actually a lot of business Republicans, Senator Sherman, that pushed to make sure we had antitrust enforcement so we could keep competition strong and have innovative ideas and bring prices down. It's the fundamental part of our capitalist society that we have to have some checks and balances. And that's just gone downhill. And especially with these new sophisticated companies where they are literally controlling the gateways. Google is probably the easiest example to see because of the 90% dominance they have of the search market. And that's why actually at the end of the Trump administration, Macon Delrahim, the head of antitrust, who I had a good working relationship with, they brought a major suit. That's why Commissioner Simon, the head of the FTC, a Republican head of the FTC, brought the case against Facebook. And that will be continued with this administration. So it's about enforcement of the laws. And I think anyone that looks at the AT&T breakup back then, when AT&T had a horizontal monopoly over all phone service and a vertical one over the infrastructure that made phone service, in the end, even a former head of AT&T said that was to their advantage. They got broke up in the end because they then competed. And so that's what this is about. It isn't just some radical dream. It's about looking at WhatsApp and Instagram and why did they buy them? Maybe they should be separate companies so we can actually grow competition. So that's what my book is about, the history and what we can do. And as the incoming chair of the antitrust subcommittee, meaning I have the gavel, I'm going to work as hard as I can to try to get some bipartisan support to take on some changes to the laws to take on the monopolies.
Of course, competition can also provoke a voracious appetite for clicks and participation, which can feed into the other less healthy. I think Senator Romney, we could do a whole session on antitrust, and I'd be fascinated to hear your views on it. But I want to stick to the topic at hand, having introduced antitrust. But you've got two big issues coming before you now. You just came back from being sworn in as for the impeachment proceedings, for the Senate trial of impeachment. There's this. There are those who argue that yes, it may be important to hold people accountable, but this will make it more difficult, the environment more difficult to achieve compromise and a better environment. That this will inflame the raw political passions. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm not going to let you get away from antitrust without making a couple of points. When I was in law school, my antitrust professor was Stephen Breyer, now Justice Breyer, and I would raise my hand in argument because I felt that he didn't define the markets properly when he looked at monopolization, and I felt it was difficult having lawyers who hadn't been in the business world to really understand what is a market, what creates competition, what is monopolistic behavior. And I would just note to my colleague, Andy Klobuchar, given her chairmanship, that today the market for many things is global, not just domestic. Mm-hmm. And she knows that, of course. And one of the areas where America is succeeding, one of the few areas where we're succeeding internationally is in the tech area. The Chinese are coming on strong, and they will ultimately beat us industry after industry, as they have been, in part because of their predatory behavior. And they don't have to live by our antitrust laws. So we have to think, and I know that's a big topic, but I just note I approach this very cautiously given what's happening. But back to the question that you asked.
I'm in front of two big dogs here, and I probably made a mistake. But
all my professors were at University of Chicago, right? So we had like opposite. We seemed to have rebelled against our. Keep going.
Okay, with regards to where we are now, there's no question but that the nation is divided now, and there's a lot of anger. And the people largely on my side who are saying, look, an impeachment trial is going to inflame passions more. I say, first of all, have you gone out publicly and said that there was not widespread voter fraud and that Joe Biden is a legitimate president of the United States? If you've said that, then I'm happy to listen to you talk about other things that might inflame anger and divisiveness. But if you haven't said that, that's really what's at the source of the anger right now. There are many, many Republicans, almost 3/4, who believe that democracy itself has been stolen. And that's a very passionate perspective. And so you've got to have that get to the rearview mirror before you talk about the next stage. Now, I'd also say, if you want to see national unity, you really have to rely on truth and justice. And justice being carried out is something which American people expect. 5 people died with the attack on the Capitol. 5 human beings died. And there's no question but that the president incited the insurrection that occurred. To what degree and so forth is something we're going to evaluate in the trial that will proceed. And how culpable is he? That's something we will evaluate. But this, to simply say, well, we're gonna just move on because we need to be united, would not be, I think, consistent with the history of justice as applied in our country. And I believe it's an element of unity, which I look forward to having resolved so that we can move on.
Lindsey Graham, just staying with you for 1 second. Lindsey Graham, I saw, said, I think yesterday, he was asked how people would vote on impeachment and maybe this issue of constitutionality, and he said, it depends on which state you come from and what stage of career you're in. I took that last part to be maybe aimed at you, but his point was people are going to vote their political interests on that. And Senator Klobuchar, that's been the history of these impeachments, not just through Donald Trump, but in history. They tend to follow partisan.
I don't think that's what Liz Cheney was doing, David, when
Right.
she said this
Well, I want
was
to ask you guys
courageous.
about that
I mean, I think there are some courageous people that have stood up, and I think one of our goals here is to make very clear to Americans as we proceed with this. And I agree with everything Mitt said when it comes to we can't shirk our constitutional duties to hear this case and to make very clear what happened here. But we can do two things at once. Like the American people are juggling their laptops on their desk and their kids on their knees, and they're teaching their first graders right now how to use mute buttons. I think it's really important for people to understand is that we get that we've got to move a cabinet, and we've done that now. We've had 3 cabinet nominees approved for Secretary of State and Treasury and Defense Secretary. And we also have got the COVID package now on our laps, and we've got to get that done. I'm looking at this clock behind me. I'm in the president's room where Joe Biden actually signed his papers. Look at this, David. The clock is ticking. It's a metaphor. We have to get this done.
Yeah, it is ticking. So I need to move on, but I will say.
I didn't mean it that way. I mean, on America.
No, but I'm glad you reminded me. But I will say there, and by the way, nothing. I don't assign myself to Senator Graham's comments in any way to take away from the courageous position that Mitt Romney has taken, which has been notable and important. It is also important to note that the 10 members of the House who voted that way are under tremendous pressure right now, including Liz Cheney fighting off a move to depose her as the number 3 Republican in the House. So that's how you measure courage, and they have shown it. And I'm sure Senator Romney, you probably can speak to the fact that because you voted for you stood alone and voted for the last conviction of Donald Trump. I'm sure that didn't make for very pleasant encounters along the trail back home in Utah and around the country.
I just note, David, that there may be some truth to one implication of what you quoted Lindsey Graham as saying, and that is by virtue of having been in politics for quite a while, you learn some lessons. And I look back in my life, and I can point to a couple of places where I rationalized decisions which were in my best interest politically, but looking back, I probably knew in my heart they were not quite right. And those things haunt me to this day. And I said to myself, as I began this trial and as I began my service in the Senate, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do everything I can to live with perfect integrity. That's not possible, but I'm going to do my very best to live with integrity and be comfortable with myself by virtue of doing that. Because I've tried the other way a couple of times and it doesn't feel good. And so there is some wisdom in saying someone that's new to the realm may have a different perspective than someone who's been around for a while.
Yeah.
But having been around for a while, I am, when I took the oath again today, saying I will apply impartial justice, I believe very fundamentally that is something I have got to say to myself. That is what I did.
I applaud you for that, Senator Klobuchar. I want to ask you about another issue that you guys are grappling with simultaneously, because you point out you got to deal with a lot of things at once, and that is the package you mentioned earlier. The president's proposed this package, 1.9 trillion. It's something that you and Senator Romney disagree on. President's trying, and I know you had a bipartisan meeting. I don't know if each of you were in there. I think you were in, Senator Romney, on Sunday to discuss this with Brian Deese, the president's economic advisor. How much there is this competition between bipartisanship and cooperation and speed here. How long and how do you work to try and get a bipartisan agreement here? before you trigger budget reconciliation, which would allow you to pass the president's plan with theoretically with all Democratic votes? And what's the cost of moving forward on that road rather than working through a proposal with folks like Senator Romney on the other side?
Okay, well, I mean, first, it's important to note we've had two major bipartisan packages that Mitt's been involved in and supported. I've been involved in, one right away, and then one in December, $900 billion. I think that was good. We're now at this point where if we do wait, and I think your point is right, for months, that will be a problem for the American people. We've got still a lot of people unemployed. We still have the vaccine distribution has been a complete fiasco. And in Joe Biden's plan is a bunch of money for distribution centers, for expanding vaccines, expanding testing. One of the most outrageous things right now is that some kids are in schools where they can get the testing. They do the test this morning every single morning. A bunch of public school kids, especially in poor areas, are not in school. It's bad for our whole economy. I'm pretty obsessed with this. And I think that just is a glaring example of why we've got to put resources in and get moving on all of this. And then our economy's better on the other end. So my hope is that we can work together. You know, Joe Biden loves negotiating agreements. He did that when I was in the Senate. He was the one that President Obama sent over. And then we do have the history, the Affordable Care Act. We don't have the luxury of waiting that long if we can't get an agreement. If you remember, David, how we tried and tried and tried, and then that went down, and then we ended up passing it on its own. I'm hoping we won't be there. I hope that we can work out an agreement that's bipartisan.
Senator Romney, what do you think the odds of that happening, and what would the impact on your caucus be if it went the other route?
Well, I think the White House is really going to have the final call on how they would want to proceed. I think one thing that is very likely to be possible would be for a bipartisan bill to come forward that deals, as Amy said, with vaccine production, vaccine distribution and inoculations, additional investments in PPE, in testing and so forth. And that could be a pretty substantial number, as well as extension of unemployment insurance beyond March 14th, as well as perhaps funding for housing. So some of those things, I think you'd see a bipartisan agreement, maybe that, we battle back and forth on numbers and we could get there pretty quickly. And there's probably a need to move very, very quickly on that. I think on some of the other things, the gap between the two sides is pretty substantial. And maybe it may be that we do one bill on the things we can get pretty close on. On the other, the White House decides to go with reconciliation, but that'll be obviously their call. I do believe it's important that we move pretty aggressively on those areas that Amy just indicated, that I described, that are that need action on an urgent basis.
What do you do generally in an environment in which there are large numbers of people in both parties who consider compromise an act of treachery and cooperation an act of treachery? I mean, that is the environment in which you guys have operated for the last so many years. How do you break that dynamic and restore a sense of trust that people are operating in good faith, and in a big, diverse country, compromise is the only way a democracy can move forward?
There was a moment on the night of January 6th when 93 senators voted the same with what Mitt started this discussion with, in favor of our democracy. That wasn't really a compromise, of course, because it wasn't legislation, but to me, it was a sign that we could agree on some things, fundamental things. I'd add some other things. How do you get agreement? Well, you find that common ground. And immigration, we haven't talked about that. Several presidents now, George Bush wanted to get that done. We had an agreement, but that went down back then because the Senate just couldn't pass it. Then Barack Obama, we got a bill passed in the Senate, and then the House didn't get it done. I figure third time's a charm. We had a great group working on Dreamers, and we got gut punched, led by Mike Rounds, who's a pretty conservative senator. We got gut punched by Donald Trump. And so I think that is an area where you could find common ground. Infrastructure, broadband, those kinds of things. A lot of interest in that on a bipartisan basis. So even these issues, the USMCA that passed with some changes recently, in a big way it passed. And so when you look at dealing with China, something Mitt put out there, there could be some trade agreements that we could pass or other things that would allow us to be in a better position. So I think there's room. It's just a different cast of characters sometimes comes together on different issues, and we have to remember that. And we have, again, a president that instead of sending out mean tweets every morning, appears to be interested in working with both sides.
You agree with that, Senator Romney? That
Yeah, I do. I mean, there will always be a few people who are, planning on running for president, and they will be doing their very, very best to stake out their commitment to, the base of their respective parties. But I think most of us in the Senate want to get something done. And I've heard this from senator after senator, frustrated over the last, I've only been here 2 years, but over the last 2 years saying, I didn't just come here to vote on appointments. I want to get some stuff done. And so people are working together. Our committee on health and education, labor, and pensions came together on surprise medical billing. And the committee voted, I think it was 20-2 in favor of a surprise medical billing provision. And it made it in the relief bill that was passed in December. So there are things happening on a bipartisan basis. And I agree with Amy. I think we can do something on immigration. I think we can do something on this COVID relief package. I think some of these issues we'll be able to tackle. I think some are going to be really hard. I think climate change policy is going to be very hard. I think we'll tend to deal with issues at the edges. But the big, the big steps that would really be required to have an enormous impact on climate change, I think those are going to be hard to get accomplished. But I'm hopeful. But I think I'm with Amy on this. I think there's more bipartisan sentiment right now than I've seen in some time in this body.
you on climate, it's interesting. You've been certainly more outspoken than many people in your party on this issue, and yet you also opposed President Biden's decision to to suspend drilling on federal lands. And it does underscore the fact that there are a confluence of interests that you all represent, and they're different based on different parts of the country. And the question is, how do you navigate around that in a big, diverse country? I could let you guys answer that question, but I know that you guys have a heart out, and I would be remiss if I didn't, because of the audience we have, if I didn't ask you what role the business community can play in trying to enforce more moderation. And I don't mean even on policy, I just mean in terms of how the political actors approach each other. How does the business community help incentivize good practices in terms of senators and congressmen actually working together in the public interest?
Well, I'll just speak from Minnesota, where I think we have 17 or 18 Fortune 500 companies. I always used to tease people like Mark Warner that we had more per capita than his state, and he would always say, it's per capita. But having worked with our business community a lot, what I see as positive with encouraging other side of the aisle work is, one, when we do things together, that is mentioned. Sometimes we do forums like this with our businesses in Minnesota, and it is commended. We do town halls with people, with the companies, and you'll have employees ask questions that may be different than how the CEO thinks, but I think that's a good thing, to expose members of both parties to people within the company and be I would say brave enough to have them come in as business leaders, because you know that there may be some disagreements with some of the employees. I found that helpful. I think some of the work the business community has been doing on climate change, when the car companies stood up, some of them did, to the Trump administration on that, where you have major CEOs like in Cargill in Minnesota who stood up and said climate change is a problem. When they've stood up on immigration reform because they understand and have supported bipartisan agreements, how important it is for business. When a bunch of them have stood up, business leaders, for democracy itself, with what the issues that Mitt has been talking about and some of the split within their own party. And gay rights, that was a major issue in my state when General Mills came out against a very negative bill that would have outlawed gay marriage and civil unions. And I remember when the protesters came to General Mills, they served them cereal and coffee outside in a nice Minnesota way.
Yeah.
But all of those issues which have come to them because of their employees oftentimes, or their customer base, with Target in my state, not to name drop every company we have, but all of that has really
campaigning on our time.
It's made a big difference in our state, and these are companies we're proud of and employees we're proud of. So.
Yeah. Senator Romney, just a quick word on that. And one thing that Senator Klobuchar didn't mention is, to be blunt about it, political support in the form of contributions and donations and so on. That seems to get the attention of people in public life. And how do corporations and businesses balance that? The sort of their desire to provoke better behavior and their need to get support for their pet project.
Well, leadership matters. And one of the lessons I've learned in my life is to recognize that people who are leaders have far more influence than I ever would have imagined. Leaders in organizations, whether it's a church, a school, a corporation, a family, a government, what they say and what they believe has an enormous impact on people who work with them. And so individuals in the business community, as they speak out and become involved in issues of significance, that really makes a difference, a huge difference. And I know we listen here. I'd also note CEOs may not be loved across America, but they're loved more than senators are and Congress people are. And there's more, people have more trust. Believe it or not, the polls show there's more trust in CEOs than there is in senators and Congress people. And so what business people have to say makes a real difference on the attitude of the public. And I would note, if businesses are just talking about their parochial self-interest, that will be dismissed. But when they speak about issues that are perhaps beyond their own income statement, then people stand up and pay attention, and it gets written about it and promoted. And that's why, I mean, for instance, with regards to climate change, I think it's important when you see car companies or oil companies even stand up and say, yeah, this is a real problem, and they make proposals that are big proposals. And whether that's a carbon tax dividend, that's a big idea that would have a big impact. Those kinds of things, I think business leaders, if they agree with them or disagree, speaking out makes a real difference.
So you are both great examples of public servants, and that was obvious from this conversation. I'm sorry we've run out of time. I wanted to read from George Romney's speech to the Republican convention in 1964, which is really a remarkable speech about extremism and the dangers of extremism and prejudice. And the one thing that, listening to this conversation and others I've been involved with Senator Romney on, it is also powerful proof of genetics, I think. So I highly recommend that people read it. Senator Klobuchar, you'd enjoy and appreciate this speech, but you're both terrific, and it's always so good to be with both of you, and thanks for your time.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.